She burst through the clubhouse doors, clutching her backpack like armor.
There's a man following us,
the girl whispered. They looked at the terrified girl and knew this wasn't a child's imagination. A car kept circling her street. The bikers searched and found nothing, until rumors turned inward. Suspicion split the neighborhood, and one quiet mistake nearly let the real predator slip away. The heavy door of the clubhouse swung open with a crash that made every head turn. Sophia stood in the doorway, her chest heaving, backpack clutched against her body like a shield. Her face was flushed from running, and her eyes darted around the room with raw, genuine fear. Paul set down his coffee mug and walked toward her. He recognized her instantly, the quiet girl from his son's class, always front row, always attentive. The composed student from school events was gone. In her place stood a terrified kid with nowhere left to turn. Sophia. Paul knelt down to her eye level. What's wrong? There's a man, she whispered, her voice cracking. He's been following us, me and my mom, for days now, and he's out there right now driving around our street. The other bikers gathered around, their casual Saturday afternoon suddenly charged with tension. Charlie, Paul's closest friend in the club, stepped forward with his arms crossed. Following you how? Charlie asked gently. Sophia's words tumbled out in a rush. A car. Dark blue, I think. The paint is peeling on the hood. Windows so dark you can't see inside. He drives past our house really slow, like he's looking at something. Yesterday he did it 3 times. Mom said I was being paranoid, but I'm not. I saw him again today when I was walking home from the library. He turned the corner right after I did. Paul exchanged a glance with Charlie. Peeling paint, tinted windows, those weren't details a kid invented. Where's your mom now? Working. She does 2 shifts on Saturdays at the diner. Sophia's lower lip trembled. I didn't know where else to go. I see you guys around the neighborhood all the time and I thought maybe you could help. Paul put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You did the right thing coming here. We're gonna figure this out. Within minutes, 6 motorcycles roared to life. The bikers split into pairs, each taking a different section of the neighborhood. Paul kept Sophia with him at the clubhouse while the others searched. She sat on the worn leather couch, backpack clutched tight, eyes locked on the door. 20 minutes later, the bikers regrouped. No dark blue car, nothing suspicious. But they had found Dolores Martinez, the neighborhood's unofficial information hub, watering her roses 3 blocks from Sophia's house. Oh, I saw it, Dolores told Charlie, leaning in with that familiar gleam of someone holding crucial information. 15, maybe 20 minutes back. Creepy thing driving like a predator stalks prey. Dark windows, paint flaking off like diseased skin. Drove past twice while I was out here. Gave me the shivers. Charlie called the local police station. Officer Reeves, who'd gone to high school with Paul, met him at a coffee shop nearby. The news wasn't comforting. We've had reports, Reeves said, stirring his coffee slowly. 6 families in the past month, all describing the same thing. Dark sedan, tinted windows, circling residential streets. We've increased patrols, but here's the thing. Every time we respond, the car's gone. Like whoever's driving knows exactly when to disappear. That's not all, is it? Charlie saw it in his old friend's face. The tension that came before bad news. Reeves leaned in closer. 2 houses got hit. Burglaries. Both times, the families had reported the suspicious vehicle days before. Both times, they were robbed when no one was home. We think someone's casing houses, figuring out patterns, looking for vulnerabilities. Back at the clubhouse, Sophia sat with Paul, slowly relaxing enough to drink the hot chocolate one of the bikers had made for her. Paul studied the girl, small for her age but sharp, watching everything. Sophia, those 2 houses that got robbed, do you know the families? She nodded slowly. The Hendersons and Mrs. Kapoor. The Hendersons, Mr. Henderson left like 6 months ago. Mrs. Henderson works nights. And Mrs. Kapoor's husband travels for work, gone for weeks at a time. She told my mom she feels scared being alone in that big house. Paul felt his stomach tighten. Single mothers, women alone, vulnerable households. And now Sophia and her mother, Magda, living alone after her father left last year. We're targets, Sophia said quietly, her voice unnaturally steady. That's what he's looking for. Houses where we're alone. The weight of her words hung in the air. This wasn't just about catching a thief anymore. This was about protecting people who'd already been abandoned once and couldn't afford to lose anything else. The rumor started small, whispered at the grocery store, murmured over backyard fences. By Monday afternoon, it had spread through the neighborhood. What if the threat wasn't coming from outside at all? Paul heard it first from Sean, another club member, who'd stopped by the gas station and overheard two women talking. They're saying Larry's involved, Sean said, keeping his voice low. Said he's been acting strange, parking on random streets, just sitting in his truck for hours. Larry Brennan had been with the club for 3 years. Quiet, reliable. First to arrive, last to leave. But lately he'd been distant. He'd skip club meetings, show up looking exhausted, and leave without explanation. Paul had figured personal problems. Everyone had rough patches. But now, with a criminal stalking the neighborhood, Larry's odd behavior took on a sinister shade. I've seen him, Mrs. Madsen from 2 streets over told Dolores, who naturally told everyone else. Tuesday night, parked under the oak tree on Maple, just sitting there in the dark. When I turned on my porch light, he drove away fast. At the clubhouse that evening, the tension was thick enough to cut. Larry sat alone at the bar, nursing a beer, while the others gathered in clusters, their conversations dying whenever he looked their way. Paul watched it all with growing frustration. This was how communities tore themselves apart. Suspicion feeding suspicion until everyone became the enemy. We need to talk about this, Charlie said, pulling Paul aside. Half the neighborhood thinks Larry's the guy. If we don't address it, someone's going to do something stupid. Larry's not a thief. I know that. You know that. But what we know doesn't matter if everyone else is ready to run him out of town. Charlie ran a hand through his graying hair. We need to solve this fast, before the real criminal gets spooked and disappears, or before someone goes after Larry. That's when Charlie proposed the plan. Risky, maybe reckless, but it was action. They'd take Sophia and Magda to the clubhouse for a few nights, make it obvious the house was empty and vulnerable. Meanwhile, Paul and Charlie would stay inside, lights off, waiting. If the stalker was watching the way they suspected, he'd see an opportunity too good to pass up. Magda was surprisingly easy to convince. Paul had expected resistance, but Magda had been carrying her fear alone for too long. Sophia's terrified to sleep, Magda admitted, dark circles under her eyes betraying her own sleepless nights. She checks the locks 5 times before bed. Yesterday she asked if we could move. She's 10 years old and asking to move because she doesn't feel safe. Sophia packed her backpack with careful attention. Pajamas, toothbrush, her favorite book, the stuffed rabbit she pretended not to need anymore. At the clubhouse, the bikers had set up a small room for them with clean sheets and extra blankets. Sophia seemed to breathe easier surrounded by the rumble of motorcycles and the solid presence of men who'd promised to keep her safe. The first night felt endless. Paul and Charlie sat in Magda's living room with the lights off, the only illumination coming from street lamps filtering through the curtains. Every passing car made them tense. The refrigerator humming, old pipes creaking. Every sound became a potential threat. But nothing happened. No dark sedan. No break-in attempt. Just the agonizing slowness of hours passing in the dark. By dawn, Charlie was second-guessing everything. Maybe we spooked him. Maybe someone tipped him off. Or maybe, he didn't finish the sentence, but Paul heard it anyway. Maybe it was Larry, and Larry knew about the trap. Back at the clubhouse, Larry had spent the evening talking with Magda. Paul noticed them on the back patio, 2 people who'd both lost something important, sharing the quiet conversation of the wounded. When he asked Magda about it later, she smiled for the first time in days. He's hurting too. His engagement ended badly. She left him for someone else, and he's been driving around at night because he can't sleep, can't stand being in the apartment they shared. It explained Larry's behavior, but it didn't solve their problem. The real criminal was still out there, and they were running out of time. Neighbors were getting nervous. Some were talking about neighborhood watch patrols, about taking matters into their own hands. The pressure was mounting. One more night, Paul decided. We try one more night. If nothing happens, we go back to the police, ask them to increase patrols, maybe set up cameras. Charlie nodded slowly, though doubt clouded his features. And if something does happen, then we end this. The second night felt different from the start. Paul couldn't explain it. Instinct, maybe. Years of reading situations, sensing when trouble was close. The air felt heavier, charged with anticipation. Or maybe it was just exhaustion playing tricks on his mind. Charlie felt it too. You think tonight's the night? He asked as they settled into their positions in the darkened living room. This time they'd prepared differently. Chairs positioned for better sightlines, phones fully charged. A clear plan for what to do if someone actually showed up. If he's been watching, he knows the pattern now, Paul said. Empty house, 2 nights running. If he's going to make a move, it'll be tonight. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. 11 became midnight. Midnight became 1. Charlie's head was starting to nod forward when Paul grabbed his arm, squeezing hard. Outside, a car engine cut off somewhere down the street. Not directly in front, but close enough. They waited, barely breathing. Minutes passed. Paul was beginning to think he'd imagined it when he heard something else. The soft scrape of shoes on concrete. Someone moving through the side yard, staying low, avoiding the streetlights. A figure appeared at the kitchen window, thin silhouette testing the frame. Paul recognized the movements immediately. This wasn't someone's first burglary. The person moved with practiced efficiency, producing a thin tool from their pocket and working it into the window frame. The window slid open with barely a whisper. The intruder paused, listening, then pulled himself up and through with smooth, athletic grace. He landed softly in the kitchen, barely a sound on the linoleum. Paul counted to 3, giving the burglar time to commit fully to the break-in, then flicked on his flashlight, aiming it directly at the intruder's face. The young man froze. He couldn't have been more than 22, wearing dark clothes and a backpack. For a split second, everyone was perfectly still. Then the burglar bolted for the window he'd entered through. Charlie was faster. He'd positioned himself near the kitchen specifically for this scenario, and he reached the window before the intruder, blocking the escape route. The young man spun, looking for another exit, but Paul was already moving, cutting off the path to the front door. "Don't make this worse," Paul said, his voice calm but firm. "It's over." The burglar's eyes darted around the room, calculating odds, looking for an opening that didn't exist. His shoulders sagged in defeat. "I didn't take anything," he said, voice shaking. "I just got here." "Sit down," Charlie ordered, gesturing to one of the kitchen chairs. "Police are already on their way." That was a bluff. Paul was just pulling out his phone. But the young man didn't know that. He sat heavily, his hands trembling as he placed them on the table. Up close, he looked even younger. Acne scars on his cheeks, desperation in his eyes. "What's your name?" Paul asked, keeping his distance but his tone conversational. Sometimes people talked more when you didn't treat them like criminals. "Otto." The name came out as barely more than a whisper. "Otto what?" "Just Otto. That's all you're getting." Charlie called Officer Reeves, explaining the situation. While they waited, Paul studied the young man. Something didn't add up. "How'd you know this house would be empty tonight?" Otto's jaw clenched. He stared at the table, saying nothing. "Come on, Otto. You're already caught. The only question now is whether you're going down alone or taking someone with you." Paul leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Because we both know you didn't just randomly pick this house. Someone told you it was vulnerable. Someone's been feeding you information." The silence stretched out. Otto's knee bounced nervously under the table, his fingers drumming an anxious rhythm. Finally, he looked up. Paul saw the calculation in his eyes. The moment someone decides cooperation might be the only way out. "I want a deal," Otto said. "I tell you everything. But I want it on record that I cooperated." "That's between you and the police," Charlie said. "But I can tell you this. The cops have been looking for you for weeks. 2 other burglaries, multiple reports of stalking. Whatever you give them better be good." Otto swallowed hard. "There's someone else. Someone who lives here in the neighborhood. He's the one who told me which houses to hit, when the people would be gone, what was worth taking." He even warned me when you guys or the cops were doing patrols. Paul felt his blood run cold. They'd suspected an inside connection, but having it confirmed was different. Someone they knew, someone their neighbors trusted, had been systematically betraying them. Who? Paul's voice was harder now. Otto shook his head. Not until the police get here. Not until I know I'm getting something out of this. Headlights swept through the window, Officer Reeves arriving. But as Paul opened the door to let him in, his mind was already racing ahead. Someone in the neighborhood was a traitor, and in a few minutes they were about to find out who. Officer Reeves recorded everything on his phone as Otto talked. The young man's bravado had evaporated, replaced by desperate eagerness. He sat hunched over the kitchen table, speaking quickly, words tumbling out like confession might reduce his guilt. His name is Eddie Martinez, Otto said, and Paul felt his stomach drop. He's been feeding me information for 2 months, which houses had single women who worked late shifts when people went on vacation. He knew everything about everyone. Eddie Martinez, Charlie repeated slowly. Dolores's nephew? Otto nodded. He lives with her. Has for like a year since he dropped out of college. She talks about everyone in the neighborhood who's getting divorced, who lost their job, who bought new stuff. Eddie would just listen and pass it all to me. He even drove past houses in his aunt's car sometimes, the one with the tinted windows she never uses, checking if people were home before giving me the green light. The pieces fell into place. Dolores, the neighborhood gossip who knew every detail of every life on every street. She'd been an unwitting accomplice. Her endless chatter weaponized by her own nephew. The dark sedan with peeling paint wasn't Eddie's daily driver. It was his aunt's old car, sitting in her garage most days, perfect for reconnaissance work. He'd text me when coast was clear, Otto continued. Tonight he said the house would be empty, that the woman and kid were staying somewhere else. He said you guys were focused on some biker named Larry, that everyone thought Larry was the one doing it. Eddie thought it was hilarious. Paul's hands clenched into fists. All those times Dolores had seemed so helpful, so concerned, sharing information about the suspicious car. Eddie had been standing right there, listening, adjusting his plans accordingly. Every patrol route discussed on front porches, every neighborhood watch plan mentioned over garden fences, all of it had gone straight back to him. Reeves made several calls. Within 30 minutes, 2 more police cars arrived at Dolores's house. Paul and Charlie followed, needing to see this through. They stood on the sidewalk as officers knocked on the door. As Dolores answered in her bathrobe, confusion turning to horror as they asked for Eddie. The young man tried to run out the back door but found more officers waiting. They brought him out in handcuffs, his face pale and defiant. Dolores stood on her front porch, one hand pressed to her mouth, watching her nephew being loaded into a police car. When she finally looked at Paul and Charlie, tears filled her eyes. I didn't know, she whispered. All those conversations, I was just talking. I didn't know he was using it. I didn't know. Paul wanted to be angry with her, but seeing the devastation on her face, he couldn't. She'd been careless, thoughtless with other people's privacy, but she hadn't been malicious. Her nephew had exploited her nature, turning her greatest weakness into his criminal advantage. By morning, the news had spread through the neighborhood. The reaction was relief mixed with betrayal. The threat was gone, but it had come from within. Several neighbors stopped by Dolores's house, some to offer awkward comfort, others to express their anger. She sat on her porch accepting both, looking smaller and older than Paul had ever seen her. At the clubhouse, Sophia and Magda learned they could finally go home. Sophia's reaction surprised everyone. She cried, not from fear but exhaustion, the release of tension carried for weeks. Magda held her daughter, stroking her hair, whispering that it was over. They were safe now. Larry arrived as they were packing up. He'd brought breakfast, donuts and coffee, and Sophia ran to him, hugging his legs in a way that made the tough biker's eyes glisten. Over the past 2 nights, while Paul and Charlie were on stakeout, Larry had become Sophia's guardian at the clubhouse, teaching her card games and listening to her chatter about school. Thank you, Magda said to Larry, her hand briefly touching his arm. For everything. For listening. For understanding. Something passed between them, conversations from the clubhouse patio continuing in silence. Larry had opened up about his broken engagement, how his fiancée had left him for a colleague, how he'd spent nights driving aimlessly because their shared apartment felt like a museum of everything he'd lost. Magda had shared her own story of abandonment, of a husband who decided fatherhood was too much responsibility, leaving her to raise Sophia alone. Two people recovering from loss, finding common ground. "I'd like to take you both to dinner," Larry said, the words careful but genuine. "If that's okay. Once things settle down." Magda smiled, and Sophia nodded enthusiastically. "Can we get pizza? With extra cheese?" Life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal, though changed in subtle ways. Trust rebuilt itself slowly, one conversation at a time. Paul noticed people were more careful about what they shared, more aware that information could be a weapon in the wrong hands. Dolores still sat on her porch most days, but her conversations were quieter now, tinged with a permanent sadness about Eddie, who was facing serious charges. Larry became a regular presence at Magda and Sophia's house, helping with repairs, joining them for dinners that stretched later and later into comfortable evenings. Sophia bloomed under the attention, her fear gradually replaced by the confidence that came from knowing she'd been brave when it mattered most. On Saturday afternoons, Sophia would visit the clubhouse with homemade cookies, entertaining the bikers with stories from school. The little girl who'd burst through their door terrified had found a second family. Paul watched it all with quiet satisfaction. They'd proven that safety didn't always come from badges and uniforms. Sometimes it came from a community willing to stand together when someone needed help. Sophia's courage saved more than just her own home. She protected an entire neighborhood from a threat hiding in plain sight. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is ask for help when we're scared. Would you have trusted the bikers? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more incredible true-to-life stories. Your next adventure is just one click away.